Dozens of Texas educators risk losing their ability to teach over comments they made on social media in the wake of conservative activist Charlie Kirk's assassination. This week on Inside the Investigation, KXAN Investigative reporter Kelly Wiley explains how teachers, attorneys, unions, and school districts themselves are calling into question the lawfulness of the state's investigation. Welcome to Inside the Investigation. I'm KXAN investigator Matt Grant, joined with Kelly Wiley, who is normally in this seat, but today the roles are reversed, so thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks for letting me fill in on your spot. And I'm very interested to talk to you particularly about your story, because this is obviously an emotional topic, the assassination of Charlie Kirk, who was a conservative icon known for visiting college campuses and fostering this dialogue and free speech, and really free speech and the First Amendment is at the issue here with your story when it comes to teachers in the classroom. So what I wanted to know is, the state launched its review into teachers' social media accounts within 2 days of Charlie Kirk's death. How did it get to be to the point where it happened that quickly?
This all happened so fast. I remember being in this room when we were watching the news and we saw this unfortunate assassination happen and this news of this start to come out. But within 48 hours, school districts were already getting reports. Parents, community members writing in and complaining about school employees, not just teachers, school employees across districts that held various roles. They were sending in screenshots, they were expressing concern, disgust, anger in these emails to staff who were then sending it to higher ups in school districts where they were saying, I don't think this person is fit to be in the classroom. What are you doing about this? And we saw very quickly there be action on the local level. So within 48 hours, we were seeing people be put on administrative leave over these comments. We were seeing them get reprimands over these comments. And so all of that was happening quickly. At the same time, there was a public outcry about it. We were seeing on social media lawmakers, everyday people taking screenshots, reposting and expressing their upset over these comments that they felt were inappropriate or celebrated the death of Charlie Kirk. We were seeing that play out on social media. We were seeing school board meetings where people were addressing it. And so that was kind of happening on the local level, on social media, which is obviously can have nationwide implications. But then on the second day or 2 days after the assassination, we saw Texas Education Commissioner Morath weigh in. And he sent a letter to superintendents at every school district, every public school district in the state, where he expressed that they too had been receiving complaints and hearing about comments that were being made on social media by educators, and that they wanted school districts to report any instances of what he called vile and inappropriate social media comments to the state. He said that any referral or any documentation that he had or that he received, their agency received, of educators making this comment would go under review and would potentially, could experience sanctions, things like having your teacher certification suspended if they were found to be to rise to the level of inappropriate, as Education Commissioner Morath said in this letter. So it all happened very quickly. And then we saw a couple days after that, Education Commissioner Morath give even more texture to his original letter to superintendents, where he said something along the lines of there's certain content that's in poor taste, but then anything that was determined to be inciting violence, they were putting in a different category in this state review, and that those people, he clarified, could potentially be referred for sanctions by the state to lose their ability to teach in public classrooms in Texas.
These were messages that were posted on these teachers' private social media accounts. These were not public, correct? And what were some of the examples of some of the messages that were inflammatory, that sparked some of these complaints?
Well, we did quite a dig to figure out just that, right? So there were comments that we were seeing because they had gotten a lot of attention, right? Like there were comments from that lawmakers pointed out or screenshot. But part of what we were trying to do is get a real understanding of what all was being said, because he created some what they were looking for, right? He established they were looking for comments that were vile, comments that were inappropriate, comments that, in his clarification, that were inciting violence. There was also talk of celebrating his assassination. They talked about the educator code of ethics. So we really wanted to understand, okay, well, what does this look like? What comments were made? So we went to the Texas Education Agency, put in a public records request to basically understand what districts did the teachers or the educators who are under review, where do they work or where did they work? Because remember, some had been put on leave or even, started the process of being terminated. So we started there. TEA did not release to us names or the posts themselves that they were looking at, the content matter that they were reviewing, but they did tell us all the districts that were referred to in these complaints that they received. So from there, we then put in public records requests to those districts to better understand. And some of the districts gave us those records, and so we were able to kind of figure out what was being said. We were also able to pull from what we already knew about, again, that was getting a lot of public attention. And the comments themselves, they kind of, there were a range of them. There was one comment in particular I remember, and a lot of them were long, but there were certain sections that stood out to me. One I remember said, something along the lines of, I wish he died sooner, right? There was one comment that stood out to me, and again, it was part of a larger post where an educator said something along the lines of, violence is never the answer, but CK was the champion of it.
CK being Charlie Kirk.
CK being Charlie Kirk. There were a lot of comments looking at what they understood Charlie Kirk's view of the Second Amendment to be and what his position on the Second Amendment to be. There was one comment that said, First Amendment meets Second Amendment, things along those lines. So those were some of the examples that stood out to me, and they ran the gamut. Some of the comments said that, pointed out that they didn't like Charlie Kirk. That was kind of the gist of it. It wasn't saying, anything in particular about the assassination, but they didn't like him as a person or didn't like his politics or didn't like what he would say on these campus tours that you pointed out, didn't like what he would say on his public platform. So they ran the gamut. But one thing is that all of them were in some way or the other reported to the Texas Education Agency, either by the district or by citizens themselves, reporting them to the Texas Education Agency.
So Kelly, I understand from your reporting there were more than 350 complaints into educators' comments that the TEA was reviewing at one time. How did you begin to review those cases?
Yeah, it really started with us just trying to get the records to start with. But we were looking for a couple of things, right? Like we wanted to know who the educators were so that we could talk to them. And in many cases, we couldn't figure that out. But we also wanted to know what they said, right? Because like you mentioned, at the center of this are a couple of things. We're talking about people's First Amendment rights and the limits that are on that for these educators, depending on the setting. We're talking about posts that were, from what we could gather, all of them were made on private social media. Maybe not locked so no one could see it. Some were, some weren't. You can change your privacy settings. But from what we could tell, all the comments were made on their private social media. Either they posted themselves or they were reposting something. So that was what we were looking at. But then we also wanted to look and find out what happened to those educators. And the records kind of varied depending on who we were asking for the records from, but we were trying to figure out what was said, where was it said, and what happened after. Were they reprimanded? Were they terminated? Were they allowed to return to the classroom? Were they reported to TEA? That's what we were kind of looking for in our analysis.
Did any teachers talk with you?
Yes, but none of them wanted to talk on the record. There was one former educator, retired educator, who's actually a school board trustee, who was reported to the Texas Education Agency. She's currently a school board trustee at a school district in Texas. And so she does have a certification that has not expired because she retired a while ago. And so she spoke with us on the record. And when we called her to say, hey, we got these records that show that I have the social post standing, I'm looking at it right now, and I have that the district that you were reported, and that someone anonymously reported you to the district, and the district then reported you to TEA. It was the first she'd heard of it. At least that's what she told us. So that trustee did talk to us on the record. There were several more teachers that or I shouldn't just say teachers, because again, this wasn't just teachers, it was all sorts of school staff and personnel. But we were able to talk to some of them, but all of them outside of this trustee didn't want to talk on the record with their name. They were very afraid of being doxxed, the ones that we talked to, of having their information somehow in the media and kind of have there to be any kind of threat to them.
I was just going to follow up to ask if you got a sense if there's any chilling effect that their social media activities being watched and scrutinized, especially in a highly political environment that we're in today, fear of doxing. Did you get a sense that those fears are permeating amongst educators right now?
Well, there's a couple of indicators. So we've seen the Texas American Federation of Teachers come out and say that there was a chilling effect. They said that in their membership, they've been hearing that educators are, scared of what repercussions might come from saying how they feel on their personal social media or even sharing things about themselves. So the Texas AFT has said that. And then separately, we've heard the Texas AFT say that they've been encouraging their members to, if your settings aren't on private now, you should do that, because otherwise you could see it picked apart or, there to be some sort of reporting. So that's one thing that we're hearing. And then separately, in going through the records, part of what we saw is that educators, as they were being called into the office, their superintendent's office, their principal's office, to discuss these posts that had been reported to the district as, potentially being inappropriate or vile or unethical for an educator to be posting, that in some of those discussions, the teachers agreed to take down their posts in order to make it right or to smooth things over with the district. So we did see some of that. And then we also saw some educators refuse to take down their posts. There was one in particular that I'm thinking of where the educator said, I'm standing by what I've said and I'm not taking it down. And then we've heard from educators themselves, the ones that kind of agreed to talk to us anonymously, that it has made them see their social media differently, and that they are fearful, not just of repercussions from the state or from the district, but also just from people, from the community, from people that might mean them harm or that they believe mean them harm.
Yeah, and the state is investigating all of this now, right? Where does that investigation stand?
So you mentioned earlier that at its peak, we understand there were 351 complaints that the state was reviewing in relation to accusations of inappropriate, vile, inciting violence, social posts that might have been in that range. Since then, the Texas Education Agency says they have whittled the list down of complaints that are still under investigation to 95. Now, the trouble is, remember, they're saying there were 350 complaints, and now there are 95 complaints that they're looking into. But we still don't know, and we have been asking, we still don't know how many educators that represents, right? Because we know in some instances there were multiple complaints that districts were fielding about maybe one educator. And so what we don't understand from the Texas Education Agency right now is, does that mean 95 educators are being investigated, or does that mean 50 educators are being investigated, but for, and maybe they have two separate, complaints under that person's name, and we still don't know that.
something that I know you'll be looking at and trying to get to the bottom of.
We're trying to, yes.
Were you able to get all the records showing the district's reports to TEA?
No, we were not. So we put in records requests to the Texas Education Agency for the complaints, the documents that they were looking at, the subject matter. And then, like I said earlier, we went through all the districts we were aware of from the list that TEA did release, and we went to those districts separately and put in public information requests. And some districts provided the records. We'd asked for reports, any records showing reports to the TEA, but also like reprimands, anybody who was recommended for termination. Some districts did give us those records. There was a second category that sent the our request to the Attorney General, essentially making the case that we think these records are confidential and that they shouldn't have to be released for various reasons. And we see this pop up all the time when we're trying to investigate something that happens at a school that may be pertaining to a employee, that sometimes they'll cite that they don't have to release evaluations or they don't have to release certain personnel records. And so I would say it was in the vein of that. But the smaller group, they denied our records requests. They denied to release the records to us, but when we came back and just asked questions like, how many educators did you report, they would answer. But then there was this third bucket of school districts that refused to release records that we'd requested and refused to answer pretty simple questions around how many have you reported. So when we're talking about these examples of social media comments that are now under investigation by the TEA, or at one point were under investigation by the TEA, we're talking about the subset of records that districts have released to us and those that are still publicly available online that we can see just because they got a lot of attention.
Yeah, Randy Weingarten, the national president of the American Federation of Teachers, recently came to Austin, as you know, to announce the union's plans to sue the TEA. What do they say about the state's investigation? What's their position on all of this?
Their main position is that they believe that the investigations are unlawful and that they violate the free speech rights that teachers have. They talk about the fact that, yes, when you're employed somewhere, there is a certain way you're expected to behave in a workplace, and particularly when you're around children. But that these posts were made on their private social media pages and that they're allowed to have beliefs, political beliefs. And so that's their main point, is that this violates their rights, that this suppresses their speech, and that it's unlawful. They also talk about that letter that Education Commissioner Morath sent out days after Charlie Kirk's passing. And they say that the standard for reporting, or the requirements for reporting that Morath laid out in this letter were vague. He said, report vile comments, inappropriate comments. And they said that there really wasn't a definition. What is vile? What is inappropriate? And so it left school districts, they say, in an awkward position to have to determine that for themselves.
Very subjective.
Right. And then even they said the clarification it wasn't phrased as a clarification, but it did provide additional information. The clarification that Morath gave days later around there's what's in poor taste and there's what incites violence, they said also it's subjective, they felt. The AFT is saying this, and they're saying that they, in their review of the comments that they're aware of, that they've not seen anything they believe rises to the level of inciting violence. So that's another component of what they're saying. And I think the main thing that the Texas AFT says is that they want to talk to Commissioner Morath. Before filing the lawsuit, they wanted to talk to Commissioner Morath and get to a consensus on, the scope of this investigation. And they really don't believe that any teacher should have their certification revoked over comments made on their private social media, that they should have this space of their own to be able to make these comments if they want to. It's kind of their, I would say, main points.
Well, Kelly, I know you'll be following this. It's a fascinating discussion. I appreciate you taking the time to join us today, and I know next time we'll see you back in this chair.
Yes.
But thanks again for your reporting, for all the work you've been doing on this, and for joining us today.
Thank you so much, Matt.
Thank you. You can watch all new episodes of Inside the Investigation on the KXAN Plus app every Friday starting at 1 p.m. Just search for KXAN on your preferred streaming devices such as Roku, Apple TV, and Amazon Fire TV. You can also listen to KXAN's Investigative podcast, where we feature audio versions of our weekly Inside the Investigation episodes like this one. You can find new episodes every Saturday morning wherever you get your podcasts. Just search for KXAN Investigates.